Let's start with athletic staleness and burnout. Let's try to understand the concept of burnout. But before understanding the concept of burnout, it's very essential to understand what is staleness, and before that, what is overtraining, and how are we using the term training, overtraining, training load. From there, we can get on to the understand the concept of staleness and how staleness leads to burnout, and what are the symptoms. How this session will help you in identifying an athlete with symptoms that yes, which may lead to burnout in future. It may not be today, but surely tomorrow. Now, one of the very common questions is about the difference between overreaching and overtraining. My discussion will be focusing on the psychological perspective. When we talk about the training, these are the very two terms which come across. Especially sometimes we use this word interchangeably. But from psychological point of view, let's try to understand these two terminologies. Whenever we talk about overreaching, overtraining, or whenever we talk about periodization in sports and whenever we talk about training in sports, definitely we will find athletes stretching out beyond their abilities. Definitely, it's a very common phenomena in the training world that yes, you'll find athletes getting into with overload. We always find athletes putting themselves into excessive training load, which nears to their maximal capacity. And in training in sports also, as part of periodization, overreaching is a deliberate strategy of exposing athletes to high volume and high intensity of training loads. And overreaching actually refers to a short cycle of training, which may last for few days to few weeks. But when we talk about overtraining, it's actually refers to training beyond the optimal level, which is ideal for maximal benefit. Now, that means when we talk about overtraining from the psychological perspective, it's important to understand that overtraining is considered as a maladaptive behavior that may lead to stillness and burnout. And for all the participants of this session, we should understand that one athlete's overtraining might be another athlete's optimum training regime also. But in any of the case, overtraining is the starting point wherein we are not confusing with the word overreaching. Yes, overreaching is important. Overreaching is part of periodization. Now let's try to understand this concept in a much simpler way. Training load will always be there in sports. If the preparation of the athlete is there, so training overload will be there because the overload principles says that when there is an overload during the rest and recovery during the supercompensation phase, adaptation improves. Athlete is adapted to the load and it helps in improving or enhancing the performance of the athletes. Now, if I try to put, whenever there is a training load, there are three things which happen. It's very interesting to understand and it's very easy and common thing also. One, when we add the training load with the according to the training principles in the supercompensation phase, obviously during the rest and recovery, there is adaptation which helps in improving the performance. And the second part is that it also helps in maintaining the performance. So there is no problem in training overload. There is no way wherein this is gonna stop. In sports, it is an integral part. Now, when we talk about another third aspect is there is a phase sometimes when athlete's performance does not improve, when athlete is not able to maintain the performance, instead the performance of an athlete decreases. There is a negative performance. Now, this negative performance is part of overtraining, which is an area of discussion for today. As sports psychologists, as students of sports psychology, it's essential for us to understand the concept wherein due to the training overload, if improvement is happening, if maintenance of the performance happening, it's not an issue. But when there is a negative performance, these are the reflections of overtraining. Now, when this negative performance starts with the overtraining, from here we are pushing up the discussion. With the overtraining, when there is decrease in the performance, when there is deterioration in the performance of the athlete, when the athlete is not able to improve his previous marks, this creates a physiological phenomena which is called as staleness. Staleness is a state in which the athlete experience a decline in the performance due to the overtraining. In this state, athletes really have a challenge to maintain the performance due to the psychological or physiological aspects of it. Now, with the overtraining, it leads to staleness, and when there is decline in the performance, when the standards are not being able to improve by the athlete, the another issue which raises, and it is of great importance, is about the burnout. Now, burnout is a psychophysiological aspect, which is the important part for the discussion here. Burnout, which is a psychophysiological part, which reflects exhaustion among the athletes, which reflects non-responsive and disassociation from sports. And this starts from the overtraining, which leads to negative performance, that is the part of staleness. And let me just try to place it out, the concept which we just discussed: overtraining leading to negative performance, and with this negative performance, it's leading to staleness, and from staleness, if again we are not able to help the athletes out, it leads to burnout.